10 minutes to make it shorter. It's the only one I can find online. So, who likes a good argument? Anyone? And who likes arguing about money? No, very, very awkward. I'm sure you'll all agree. What I'm going to talk about today is getting paid as a business owner. So I'm sure that everybody wants to get paid. So over the next 10 minutes, I'll just be looking at some of the things that you can get paid. And the way that I'm going to do that is look at the triangle. It's a triangle that has no beginning and no end, but it has 3 points to it. It has the point at which you're giving an estimate. It has the point at which you're recording in writing what the payment terms are, and then it has the point at which you're invoicing and hopefully not chasing them too much. Now I say it's a triangle that has no end because even though the strict linear thing is to say estimates, written terms, invoicing, actually they're all relevant to one another, as we'll see. So just starting off with an example, or rather a question to you, just if you could think about for a moment what stands in the way or has stood in the way in the past of your being paid on time. And I'll just take two or three answers.
People finding that an awkward conversation to have with chasing a debt.
Brilliant. So awkward time chasing it because that's a difficult conversation. Anyone else?
Arguing about it? Like coming back and say, well, I don't agree with this, this and that.
Absolutely. Disagreement as to the price.
Or valuing ourselves.
Yeah, totally. So those are all things that stand in the way. I'm going to give a short story, which I'm sure we'll all relate to, and actually feeds into the disagreement part and probably also the chasing part as well, and probably also the finding the conversation awkward, which is I have a website designer who I've kind of helped with her terms and conditions, and she says to me that her number one problem is that she makes a website and then she gets to the end and one of two things happens. Either someone says, oh, you know, why is it now this much? Or when she's given them a fixed fee, she gets to the end and she realises that she did so many extra bits and pieces that she is not recovering her full amount. So that's just an example that I'll come back to, but turning now to the triangle. So we have the estimate part. When you're giving the estimate, I'm sure you've heard tailors say, measure twice and cut once. It's just the same with an estimate. You know, especially those of us who've ever had a building project, how many times has what you think is going to take a little bit of time takes zillions and zillions of hours and days and goes way over? It's the same sometimes with services that we provide. As I've been rolling out workshops for organisations, I've realised that actually the preparation time can be huge. I've realised that actually clients might want materials, so the preparation for the written stuff they're going to get is huge. And I've realised that actually I need to think about much, much more carefully about what they're actually going to get and how much time it's going to cost me. So very important to really understand what you're delivering and how long it's going to take, and probably put a contingency in for yourself. Now this is where in our triangle the estimate is also related to your invoicing, because it's useful to look back on jobs you've invoiced in the last 6 months or even 12 months and work out how much you invoiced and how much time you actually recovered on those invoices. So that's the part about estimates. It's also really useful for mindset, which Alison mentioned, because actually if you have a potential client and you give them the estimate and they start raising issue with it, and being nasty about it sometimes, maybe they're not a great client to have. You know, that sometimes sets the scene for the relationship that you're going to have going forward. So the main things with estimate then are, make sure you're measuring, it gives you a good indication of how the relationship works. There's also a third part to it, is it's also an opportunity to think about the invoicing stage. Because we all know that if you're chasing invoices, it's so thankless. One of the things that you can do to make it less painful is get a deposit. So if you've got a deposit up front, you've already at least got some of the cash in. You can also, which a lot of Americans do, but for some reason it's not that popular here, is ask the client to pay the whole lot up front for a significant discount. So I've known Americans who've even discounted 25 or 30% because it's worth it to have the fees up front. The other thing that having the fees up front does is it means that work doesn't go on forever and ever and ever and ever. It's easier to contain and say, this is paid, it needs to be done by X. You're not left at the mercy of clients who can quite often, depending on what sort of business you're in, just let something drag on so you never get to the end, which is why you never get paid. So it's also an opportunity to set out that deposit or other favourable terms to yourself. So the bit in the middle then is your written terms. Now, I don't think you always need to have a fully written contract because it's not always practical to have a fully written contract. It's a best possible scenario, but we don't always have the time and the money to put in place the best possible scenario. So the bare minimum is making sure that you've recorded the essential terms. I'm sure as both the lawyers know, and probably more of you, I know Michelle used to be a lawyer as well, that in the UK, a contract doesn't have to be in writing. So you've got a contract anyway, so why not make sure that at least what's most important is recorded in writing? Now, for a lot of us, being paid is a really important part of the business deal. Sometimes there are other things that are as important or maybe more important. I know that when I've made illustrations for friends and, not charged them huge amounts, quite often said, okay, fine, just get me a bottle of wine. But the real payoff has been getting a credit. And I have had a situation where someone who was a friend used my illustrations and just hid the credit amongst all his marketing material. But luckily, I had an email record of where he was supposed to put the credit and in what colour and font and how it's supposed to be spelled. So I was able to say, look, this hasn't happened, and actually get him to take the illustrations down. So sometimes all you need to do is record the important terms. Well, with payment, what does that mean? With terms of payment, it will just be how much, what the invoicing process is, and your details into which account your payment's going to be made. The reason why it's so important to do that is that should you get to a worst case scenario and have to chase someone through the legal process, it's really important to be able to show that the payment was due. It's really important for you to know when your payment's due as well, so you know that, right, I can invoice now. And this is where also the triangle is unending again, because if you have a contract, for example, our website example, where the website designer might need input from the client, or Francesca's probably, you're someone who probably needs input from your clients sometimes. You can also say that, okay, well, if I'm not getting input from you, I will substitute to the best of my ability. So you're never in a position where the whole project stalls and you can't get to the end. Or you can have a date that says, this is by this date, if we're not finished, I'll invoice you anyway. The other thing to record, and I'll do a recap of the key things to record in just a second. The other key thing to record is what happens if there's a change in the specifications. So it starts off by being very clear as to what the estimate actually relates to and what it doesn't cover. And then give yourself a mechanism that just says, if you want any changes, let me know and I'll think about it and then I'll confirm in writing. And that gives you an opportunity to work out if it really is a 2-second tweak or a little job. And let's face it so rarely is. It normally is something that takes time. That gives you an opportunity to be able to charge for any ongoing work. So the key things to go into the written part of the triangle are the payment terms, making sure that you can substitute any information you need, and the third one that I've now forgotten. What was the third one?
Change specification.
Change specifications, invoicing. Okay, it doesn't matter. I'm sure it'll come back to it. It will come back because luckily it's the end of this triangle, so we can slot it in somewhere else.
When they're going to pay.
When they're going to pay. Brilliant. Thank you for that. And then the final part of the triangle is the invoicing part. So of course, you send out your invoice, and in an ideal scenario, you're going to get paid. But that doesn't always happen, as we know. This is where the estimate part is useful, because if you've got a deposit from your client, you're already set up in their system, and you already know who to contact. And that's actually crucial if you hadn't had a deposit, that when you come to chase, if you have to chase, you know that you're speaking to the right person. Because the person you send the invoice to might not necessarily be whoever it is at accounts that's dealing with it. So crucial that you know you're speaking to the right person. I know someone who has a brilliant trick, which is if he doesn't get paid, he phones up his client, so not the person in accounts, but he phones up the client, and he will have emailed them a photograph of his granddaughter, and he says, oh, it's Elsie's birthday, if you don't pay, Elsie's not going to get her birthday present. And he says that always gets people to pay. But for our purposes, the thing is to think about when you're going to go from being friendly to when you're going to get fierce. So we have things like first invoice, maybe a chasing letter, maybe a phone call. At some point you might want to use a really great trick, which is if you're in a business-to-business contract, even if you haven't said you're going to claim interest, if payment's late, you can claim interest. So when you get to that end point, you can write a final letter saying, this amount is outstanding, I am entitled to charge interest, but really, if you pay right now, I won't charge interest. And that can be very helpful. But the most important thing is to make sure that you know what your system is in advance. Because when you're frantic, thinking, oh my God, invoices, you might not be in the best place to think about what your tracing trickle is. So have that in advance. So that is the simple way to get paid. Make sure that your estimate, whatever you have in writing, which can be in an email, and your invoicing process all work together seamlessly. So wishing you lots of happy collecting. Nice work.